His lawyer leaned in close, whispered 5 words, just 5, and Vincent's face, that smug, self-satisfied face I'd stared at across the breakfast table for 15 years, went completely white. His hands started trembling. The papers he'd been so eager to sign were shaking like leaves in a storm. And me? For the first time in 3 years, I smiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because what you need to understand is this. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. Everyone thought I'd given up. Everyone thought I was the victim. They were all wrong. This is the story of how a woman everyone underestimated played the longest, most patient game of her life, and won. My name is Alexis. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was married to Vincent Mercer. 15 years of marriage, longer than most Hollywood relationships, longer than some countries have existed, and definitely longer than my patience should have lasted. I met Vincent when I was 17. He was 24, charming, ambitious, full of dreams about building a real estate empire. He talked about the future like it was already his, like success was just waiting for him to show up and claim it. I was working as a file clerk at a law firm, minimum wage, maximum paper cuts. But I was good with details, good with numbers, good with keeping my mouth shut and my eyes open. We got married when I was 19. Tyler came along when I was 20, and at 23, Vincent's business finally took off. He asked me to quit the law firm and help him full-time. So I became his unpaid everything. Bookkeeper, office manager, client liaison, interior decorator, marketing coordinator, event planner. My official title? Wife. My unofficial title? Everything else. For 11 years, I poured myself into building Vincent's dream. And for 11 years, he got the credit, the awards, the recognition, the applause. At every industry event, I was Vincent's wife. At every celebration, he thanked his team, his mentors, his vision, but somehow never me. Then, 3 months ago, he came home on a Tuesday evening. I was making dinner, his favorite, actually. He sat me down at the kitchen table with this look on his face. Not sad, not apologetic, just businesslike. I want a divorce, he said. Pause. I want the house, the cars, the business, everything. Another pause. You can keep Tyler. He said it like he was ordering from a menu. I'll have the assets, hold the child, thanks. Keep Tyler. Like our 15-year-old son was a leftover pizza. Like he was an inconvenience being graciously allowed to stay with me. I just stared at him. 15 years. And this was how it ended? At our kitchen table? Between the salt shaker and the butter dish? But here's what I didn't know in that moment. What I wouldn't find out until later. Vincent had been planning this for months. He already had a lawyer, an expensive one. He'd been building his exit strategy while I was meal prepping and scheduling his dentist appointments. I'd been blindsided by a man I'd trusted with everything. The next day, his mother showed up, Lorraine Mercer, a woman who'd treated me like the help for 15 years. She patted my hand and told me I should have tried harder to keep him happy. Men have needs, dear, she said, like she was explaining something complicated to a slow child. Within a week, Vincent had completely taken control. The guest room became my permanent residence. My closet shrank from a walk-in to 2 small sections. The message was clear. This isn't your house anymore. Within 2 weeks, he started bringing her around. Brittany Sawyer, 27 years old, worked at his company. Of course she did. She had that Instagram perfect look, blonde highlights, perfect nails, yoga pants that cost more than my weekly groceries. She walked into my kitchen like she owned it, wore my apron, my grandmother's apron, while making smoothies in my blender. She was younger than my marriage, younger than my favorite handbag, but she made amazing smoothies, so I guess that's something. Vincent paraded her around like a trophy. They'd sit on my couch, watch my television, eat off my plates. He'd put his arm around her right in front of me, like I was furniture, like I'd already disappeared. The humiliation escalated daily. First, he canceled my personal credit card. We need to separate finances, he said, like he was being reasonable. Then the joint card. Then he suggested I should probably find somewhere else to stay while we sorted things out. My own house, and I was being asked to leave? Lorraine came over to help me pack. And by help, I mean she went through my belongings and decided what I deserved to keep. Old clothes? Fine. Family photos? Some of them. My grandmother's recipe box? She hesitated, like she was considering claiming it for herself. What I was not allowed to take: any jewelry Vincent had bought me, any furniture I'd picked out, anything of value. Those were marital assets, Lorraine explained. She packed my things in garbage bags, not boxes, garbage bags, like I was trash being taken out. Through all of this, I had one person I thought I could trust: Diane Holloway. We'd been friends since high school, 20 years of friendship. She was so supportive, always checking in, always asking how I was holding up. She'd come over with wine and let me cry on her shoulder. She told me I deserved better. She told me Vincent was making a huge mistake. But something felt off. Vincent seemed to know my plans before I made them. When I mentioned to Diane that I was thinking about fighting for the house, Tyler came home the next day saying Dad told him it wouldn't work. When I told Diane I was looking at apartments in a specific neighborhood, Vincent made a comment about that exact area being too expensive for me. Then it clicked. My best friend, my 20-year friend, was his spy. She'd been carrying a torch for my husband for 15 years, and Vincent, because he collected admirers like some people collect stamps, knew exactly how to use it. 20 years of friendship, sold out for some flirting and empty promises. But the worst part wasn't Vincent, wasn't Lorraine, wasn't even Diane. The worst part was Tyler. My son saw everything. The girlfriend, the grandmother packing my bags, the way his father looked at me like I was nothing. And Vincent was working on him, dripping poison in his ear day after day. Your mom is making this difficult. I just want everyone to be happy. She's the one dragging this out. Tyler started pulling away from me. Not angry exactly, just distant, confused. He didn't know who to believe, and his father was very, very convincing. I could lose the house, I could lose the money, I could lose everything I'd spent 15 years building. But watching my son look at me like I was the problem, that was the knife. That was the wound that actually bled. Here's the thing about being underestimated. People stop watching you. They stop being careful around you. They stop guarding their secrets. And that's exactly when you learn everything you need to know. 3 years. That's how long I'd been carrying this secret. That's how long I knew the truth about Vincent Mercer and his glittering, glamorous, completely fake empire. It started on a random Tuesday night, 3 before the divorce. Vincent was working late again. He was always working late by then. I was going through the company books, reconciling accounts, doing the unglamorous work that kept his business running. And I found something strange, a transfer to an account I didn't recognize, then another, then a pattern, money flowing out of our accounts into places I'd never seen before. I dug deeper. I stayed up until 3 a.m. following the trail. What I found made my blood run cold. Vincent had been taking loans against everything we owned. The house, our beautiful house that everyone admired, had 3 mortgages on it. The original loan, $400,000, a second mortgage, $350,000 taken out 4 years ago, a third mortgage, another $350,000 taken out 2 years ago. Total owed, $1.1 million. Actual value, $850,000. We were underwater by $250,000 on a home I thought we owned outright. The business was even worse. Lines of credit maxed out, $200,000. Back taxes owed, $85,000. Vendor debts, $120,000. Equipment loans, $75,000. The company Vincent bragged about at every party, the company that was supposedly thriving, it was drowning in nearly $500,000 of debt. Even the cars weren't real. All 3 released with balloon payments coming due. We didn't own anything. We just had very expensive monthly obligations. I sat in my kitchen at 3 in the morning, surrounded by printouts, and did the math. Total debt, approximately $1.9 million. Total actual asset value, maybe $1.6 million. We were $300,000 in the hole, maybe more. But where had all the money gone? I kept digging. Over the following weeks, I traced every transaction I could find. Cryptocurrency investments, $180,000, all lost. Gambling, $75,000, gone. An apartment I didn't know about, rented for a woman I didn't know about, $60,000 in rent and furnishings. Lifestyle expenses that never made it home, watches, suits, trips I was never invited on, another $85,000. My husband wasn't building an empire, he was building a house of cards with borrowed cards that were also on fire. We looked rich the same way a mannequin looks alive, convincing from a distance, completely hollow up close. My first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to cry, to demand answers. But I knew Vincent. I'd watched him operate for years. If I confronted him, he'd manipulate me. He'd explain it away, make me feel crazy for questioning him, and worse, if he knew I knew, he might try to take control of my separate money too. See, I'd always kept a little something of my own, my grandmother's voice in my head. A woman should have her own money. My IRA from my law firm years, $180,000, and my grandmother's inheritance, $340,000 left specifically to me. I had roughly $520,000 that was completely, legally, separately mine. So I didn't confront Vincent. Instead, I protected myself. I worked with my uncle to create an irrevocable trust for Tyler. My IRA and my inheritance went into that trust. Vincent's name wasn't on it. It was for Tyler's future, college, a first home, emergencies, and it was untouchable. Then I documented everything, every mortgage document, every hidden account, every suspicious transaction. I printed copies and kept them at my sister's house. I put copies in a safe deposit box. I saved everything on an encrypted drive. And then I waited. I knew Vincent would leave eventually. Men like him always do. They get bored, they find someone younger, they decide they deserve more. I just had to be ready when it happened. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of watching him dig the hole deeper. 3 years of smiling at dinner parties while knowing our entire life was built on quicksand. When Vincent finally asked for the divorce, when he demanded the house, the cars, the business, everything, I almost laughed out loud. He wasn't asking for assets, he was demanding debt. He just didn't know it yet. I hired a lawyer, Nina Castellano, 52 years old, sharp as a razor, absolutely no tolerance for nonsense. She reviewed my situation and laid out the battle plan. "You helped build this business," she said. "You're entitled to half of everything, the house, the company, the accounts. We fight." I looked at her for a long moment. What if I don't want to fight? Nina stared at me like I'd started speaking another language. She thought I was broken, depressed, too beaten down to stand up for myself. She had no idea. I placed 3 binders on her desk, 3 years of evidence, every mortgage document, every loan statement, every hidden account. She read in silence for almost an hour. When she finally looked up, her expression had completely transformed. "You've known about this for 3 years," I said. I was waiting for him to leave. I knew he would eventually. Nina leaned back in her chair. The pity was gone from her eyes. What replaced it was something like awe. "So when you sign over the assets, I walk away clean," I finished. "He gets the mortgages, the business debts, the lease obligations. All of it becomes his sole responsibility. And your inheritance, your retirement account, separate property, never commingled, legally protected, sitting safely in a trust for my son." Nina was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "Mrs. Dunst, I believe I owe you an apology," she said. "I thought you'd given up." I smiled back. Everyone thinks that. That's kind of the point. The trap was already built. The numbers were verified. The documentation was airtight. All I had to do now was let Vincent think he was winning. The next 3 months were a masterclass in acting. I became exactly what everyone expected me to be. Broken, defeated, barely holding on. I showed up to mediation sessions with red eyes and trembling hands. I spoke softly, hesitantly, like a woman who'd lost all her confidence. I requested a settlement of $50,000 cash, my personal belongings, and shared custody of Tyler. That was it. Vincent agreed immediately. He was probably expecting me to fight for half of everything. Instead, I was asking for crumbs. He looked at me across that mediation table with something almost like pity, like I was a wounded animal he was graciously putting out of its misery. With each passing week, Vincent's arrogance grew. He stopped caring, stopped pretending to be the reasonable one. He started telling everyone who'd listen that I hadn't even fought. She just gave up, he told his golf buddies. Lorraine was even worse. She bragged at her book club, at her church group, at every social gathering. Vincent is keeping everything. That woman didn't get a dime. To celebrate his upcoming victory, Vincent bought himself a new watch, $15,000. He wore it to our next mediation session, making sure I noticed. Meanwhile, Brittany had started redecorating my house. New furniture in the living room, new art on the walls. She even painted my kitchen gray. She painted it gray. I spent 3 weeks choosing that sage green color, and she painted over it with builder-grade gray, like it was nothing. Gray, like her personality, like her future with Vincent once she found out he was broke. Very fitting, actually. Diane kept calling, fishing for information under the guise of friendship. I played along perfectly. "How are you holding up?" she'd ask. "I just want it to be over," I'd tell her, making my voice crack slightly. "I can't fight anymore." Within hours, Vincent would know. I could practically see him relaxing, letting his guard down even further. But while the adults were playing their games, Tyler was watching, and my son, my smart, observant, wonderful son, was starting to notice things that didn't add up. He noticed his dad's new $15,000 watch, but heard Vincent tell him they couldn't afford the school trip to Washington, D.C. He noticed Brittany's shopping bags piling up in the foyer, but heard Vincent complain about money being tight. He noticed the disconnect. One evening, Tyler came to my tiny apartment and sat down at my second-hand kitchen table. He looked at me with those serious eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, "is Dad actually rich?" I looked at my son for a long moment. "What do you think?" He was quiet, processing. "I think something's not right. I think he's pretending." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Trust me, just wait a little longer." Behind the scenes, Nina was preparing our legal strategy with surgical precision. The main divorce agreement stated clearly I was relinquishing all claims to marital property. The house, the business, the vehicles, everything would go to Vincent. In exchange, I would receive my modest cash settlement and walk away. But attached to that agreement was an addendum, a detailed liability disclosure statement. Every debt, every mortgage, every loan, every obligation tied to those assets. When Vincent signed for all assets, he would be legally assuming all liabilities. The mortgages would become his sole responsibility. The business debts would transfer entirely to him. The lease obligations on the cars would be his problem alone. It was all there, in black and white, legal, proper, devastating. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Vincent's lawyer called Nina with concerns. "My client is assuming significant assets," Harold said carefully. "I'd like to request a full financial audit before we finalize." Nina kept her voice neutral. "Of course, we'll provide whatever documentation you need." But when Harold brought this to Vincent, my soon-to-be ex-husband shut it down immediately. "No audits," Vincent told him. "I built that company. I know exactly what it's worth. I'm not paying for some accountant to tell me what I already know." Harold pushed back. "I strongly recommend we verify the asset values before you sign." "No," Vincent cut him off. "Brittany wants this done. I want this done. No more delays." Harold had been practicing law for over 30 years. He knew when a client was about to make a mistake. He also knew he couldn't force someone to take his advice. He presented Vincent with a waiver, a document acknowledging that Harold had recommended an independent financial review and that Vincent was declining against counsel's advice. Vincent signed it without reading it, just like he'd sign everything else without reading it. Never underestimate the power of an impatient girlfriend to make a man skip the fine print. Thursday, April 17th, 9 a.m., courtroom 4B. I remember every detail of that morning, the way the sunlight came through the tall windows, the smell of old wood and floor polish, the quiet murmur of lawyers shuffling papers. This was where 15 years of marriage would officially end, and where 3 years of patience would finally pay off. Vincent arrived first, wearing his best suit, the charcoal Armani had helped him pick out 3 years ago. His new watch caught the light as he shook hands with Harold. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man about to close a very favorable deal. Brittany was waiting in the hallway, perfect makeup, designer bag, scrolling through her phone. Lorraine was there too, sitting in the gallery. She looked at me when I walked in and gave me this little smile, the kind you give someone you've already beaten. I arrived a few minutes after Vincent. Simple navy dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back in a low bun. I looked tired, defeated, like a woman who had nothing left to fight for. Perfect. Judge Patricia Holden entered, and everyone rose. Silver hair, reading glasses perched on her nose, 30 years on the family court bench. She'd seen every trick, every manipulation, every lie that divorcing couples could throw at each other. Nothing surprised her anymore. Mercer versus Mercer, final dissolution hearing. I understand the parties have reached an agreement. Harold stood first. Yes, Your Honor. My client, Vincent Mercer, is assuming all marital assets, including the family residence, the real estate development business, and all associated vehicles. In exchange, Mrs. Dunst receives a cash settlement of $50,000. Nina rose beside me. That's correct, Your Honor. My client agrees to relinquish all claims to these assets and accepts the proposed settlement terms. Judge Holden's eyes moved to me. She studied my face for a moment. Mrs. Dunst, I need to confirm that you understand what you're agreeing to today. You're giving up your claim to substantial property, the family home, the business you helped build. Are you certain this is what you want? I kept my voice soft, slightly unsteady. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And you're entering this agreement voluntarily? No one is pressuring you. No, Your Honor. I looked down at my hands, then back up at her. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. I want this to be over. The judge studied me for another long moment. I could practically see her internal debate, whether to push harder, whether to order a continuance, whether to protect me from what looked like a terrible decision. But I was represented by counsel. I was answering clearly. I was an adult woman making my own choice. Very well, she said finally. Let's proceed. The clerk distributed the final documents, page after page of legal language, signatures required on every third page. Vincent signed eagerly, barely glancing at what he was agreeing to. He wanted this done. I signed slowly, deliberately. Every stroke of my pen was careful and precise. This was the moment I'd been waiting for 3 years for. I was going to savor it. Across the courtroom, I saw Vincent glance at Lorraine and smile. She nodded back approvingly. In the hallway, his phone buzzed. Probably Brittany sending encouragement. He checked his phone. In court, during his own divorce hearing. That's the kind of man he was. Meanwhile, Harold Whitfield was doing what good lawyers do, reviewing the complete document package one final time. Main agreement, signed. Asset schedule, signed. Settlement terms, signed. Then he reached the addendum, liability disclosure statement. I watched his face as he read, watched the confusion flicker across his features, watched him flip back a page, then forward again, like he was hoping he'd misread something. He hadn't. Harold's face went pale. He leaned towards Vincent, trying to be discreet. Sir, we need to talk. Vincent waved him off, still basking in his victory. Not now. We're almost done. Sir, Harold's voice was more urgent. You're assuming all debt. Vincent turned to look at him. What? The liability disclosure, Harold whispered, papers rustling as he pointed. The mortgages, the business debts, it's all here. You're assuming personal liability for everything. For the first time, Vincent actually looked at what he'd signed. I watched his eyes scan the numbers, watched the color drain from his face. House, $1.1 million owed. Market value, $850,000. Business, $480,000 in combined debts. Vehicles, $115,000 in lease obligations. Additional personal liabilities, $200,000. Total debt, approximately $1.9 million. Net value of everything he just claimed? Negative $300,000. He hadn't won the lottery. He'd won the bill for it. Vincent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't right. He looked at me, then at the judge, then at the papers. She hid this from me. This is fraud. Judge Holden's voice was sharp. Mr. Mercer, sit down. These numbers are fake, Vincent insisted, his voice rising. She manipulated the documents. Mr. Mercer, the judge's tone left no room for argument. Sit down. He sat, but his hands were shaking. His confident smile was gone, replaced with something that looked a lot like panic. Judge Holden looked at the documents in front of her, then at Vincent. Mr. Mercer, I'm looking at the liability disclosure statement attached to this agreement. These are debts associated with assets you are claiming, assets in your name, your business, your property. She fixed him with a hard stare. Are you telling this court that you don't know your own financial situation? Silence. Harold cleared his throat. Your Honor, I should note that I advised my client to conduct an independent financial review prior to this hearing. He declined. I have documentation. He produced the waiver. The one Vincent had signed without reading. The one that said, in clear legal language, that Harold had recommended a full audit, and Vincent had refused. Judge Holden reviewed it briefly. So Mr. Mercer was advised to verify these figures. He chose not to. He signed a waiver acknowledging that choice. She looked at Vincent. Is that correct? Vincent was staring at the waiver like it was a snake that had just bitten him. I thought, is that your signature, Mr. Mercer? A long pause. Yes. Then you assumed this risk voluntarily. You had the opportunity to investigate. You chose not to. Judge Holden's voice was matter-of-fact. The agreement stands. Vincent turned to me, desperation breaking through his composure. You knew, his voice cracked. You knew about all of this. I met his eyes calmly. I was your bookkeeper for 11 years, Vincent. I knew about everything. His face cycled through emotions faster than I could count. Confusion, rage, betrayal, fear, and finally, the one I'd been waiting for. Realization, the understanding that he'd done this to himself. I want to withdraw the agreement, Vincent said, turning back to the judge. I didn't understand what I was signing. This isn't fair. Judge Holden shook her head. Mr. Mercer, you signed documents before this court stating you understood and agreed to all terms. You were represented by competent counsel. You declined additional review. Your wife did not hide anything. These are your debts, your mortgages, your obligations. She paused. The agreement is final. The gavel came down. Mrs. Dunst, you have your settlement. Mr. Mercer, you have the assets as agreed, along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved. I stood, smoothed my dress, picked up my purse. Then I looked at Vincent one last time. He was slumped in his chair, papers scattered in front of him, his whole world collapsing around him. You said you wanted everything except Tyler, I said quietly. I gave you exactly what you asked for. I walked out of that courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, I could hear Vincent's voice rising, yelling at Harold, demanding to know how this happened, threatening lawsuits. Harold's calm responses. I told you to get an audit. I have it in writing. You refused. Through the glass doors, I saw Brittany's face change as she listened, saw her look at Vincent, really look at him, and see something other than the successful businessman she'd thought she was getting. She was gone before I reached the elevator, moving fast, heels clicking on the marble floor, not looking back. I stepped outside into the April sunshine. The sky was blue. The air was warm. Somewhere behind me, my ex-husband was screaming at his lawyer about fairness and fraud, and how none of this was his fault. Ahead of me was a new life, smaller than before, simpler, but completely, entirely mine. The collapse happened faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Brittany had moved out of the house. packed her things in the middle of the night, left a note that said, "This isn't what I signed up for." The gray kitchen sat empty. Within a month, Vincent tried to sell the house. But when you owe more than something is worth, there are no buyers, just banks calling about missed payments and realtors suggesting short sales. Within 2 months, the business started defaulting. Vendors filed lawsuits. The line of credit was frozen. The company that Vincent had spent 15 years building, the company I had spent 11 years supporting, was crumbling into dust. Within 3 months, Vincent was meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. The man who'd once bragged about his empire was now calculating which assets he could protect from creditors. The answer was almost nothing. Laureen's perfect son was calling family members asking for loans, showing up at relative houses with excuses and explanations. Nobody knew about the debt. Alexis must have hidden it somehow. I was tricked. But the documents told a different story. The mortgages were in his name. The loans were in his name. The gambling debts, the crypto losses, the secret apartment. All his choices. All his signatures. Diane called me about a week after the hearing. Her voice was shaking. "I had no idea things were this bad. I'm so sorry, Alexis. I never meant for... I thought Vincent and I didn't answer. Didn't respond. Didn't give her the closure she was looking for. Some bridges aren't meant to be repaired. She tried calling 3 more times. Then she stopped. Laureen tried a different approach, going through Tyler. "Tell my mother I didn't know about the money problems. Tell her I'm sorry for how I treated her." Tyler looked at his grandmother, the woman who'd packed his mother's belongings in garbage bags, who called his mother worthless, and said, "Mom's busy building her life. She doesn't have time for excuses." Tyler, my wonderful, smart, observant son, he finally understood everything. Not because I explained it, but because he figured it out himself. One evening, about a month after the divorce, he sat with me in my small apartment, the one with the sage green kitchen, the one with the second-hand furniture and the boxes finally unpacked. "You waited 3 years," he said quietly. "You knew this whole time and you just waited." "I wanted to make sure you were protected," I told him. "Whatever happened between your father and I needed to know you'd be okay. The trust fund, $520,000, safe and untouchable." He was quiet for a moment. Then he hugged me. Really hugged me. The kind of hug I hadn't gotten from my 15-year-old son in months. The kind that said, "I understand." The kind that said, "I'm proud of you." My $50,000 settlement went toward getting established. First month's rent, security deposit, basic furniture that wasn't falling apart. It wasn't luxury, but it was stability. The trust fund stayed exactly where it was. Tyler's future, college, maybe a first home someday. A safety net that nobody could take from him. And me? I enrolled in interior design courses at the community college, the dream I'd put on hold when I was 23 to help Vincent build his empire. I was finally building my own. I started small. My first real client was a woman named Sandra, 52 years old, just ending a 28-year marriage. She was standing in her empty new apartment, looking lost. "How do you start over?" she asked me. I thought about it for a moment. 1 room at a time, 1 color at a time, 1 day at a time. We painted her kitchen sage green. She cried when she saw it. "Happy tears," she said, "the color of new beginnings." About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Vincent tried to show up at my apartment. I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, not the healthy kind, dark circles under his eyes. His suit was wrinkled. His watch was gone. He looked like a man who'd been through a war and lost. He stood in my doorway, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I didn't know it was this bad." His voice was hollow. "I made mistakes. I know that now, but I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I leaned against my doorframe and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man I'd loved for almost half my life. This man who'd thrown me away like garbage. This man who was now drowning in the consequences of his own choices. "Can we talk? Maybe we can figure something out. I don't know, Maybe we could... He couldn't even finish the sentence, couldn't bring himself to ask for what he actually wanted. Help. My help. After everything. You asked for everything except Tyler, I said calmly. You got exactly what you asked for. Alexis, please. Goodbye, Vincent. I closed the door. He stood in the hallway for 10 minutes. I know because I watched through the peephole while eating ice cream. That evening, after Tyler went to bed, I sat in my small living room and looked at my grandmother's photo on the shelf. The recipe box was next to it, the one thing Laureen almost taken, the one thing that mattered most. You were right about everything, Grandma, I said quietly. Keep your own money, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small. The apartment was quiet, small, nothing like the house I'd lived in for 15 years. But it was mine. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every decision. Mine. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, I was free.